Hello, and welcome to Archives and Records Simplified. These videos are aimed at people looking for basic knowledge about archives and records management, although at times I will also touch slightly on information and library science. These videos are designed to provide bite-sized chunks, which means that almost every video will be less than 15 minutes. These videos are honestly for everyone, and comments and suggestions are always more than welcome. About me, Sean McMillan, I'm an archivist based in London, and you can learn more about me via my LinkedIn profile, to which there is a link posted below. And I'll also post a transcript and notes also if you struggle at any point to understand my accent. And lastly, if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could kindly like, subscribe and share. Thanks again. Okay, so collections management systems. Okay, so a collections management system essentially allows you to manage your collections and record information. A collections management system is essentially a software that allows you to record formal and structured information about the collections and the archives and the various materials that you hold. Sometimes they might be called a content management systems or cataloging systems. They can come under a variety of names, but essentially the main idea is quite consistent. It's a software that allows you to record structured data that's sort of compliant with archival practice. And it's different from other types of database management softwares, such as Microsoft Access or Microsoft Excel, because they tend to have inbuilt features that make them particularly suitable for archival purpose. It's worth pointing out that there are sometimes other softwares, often provided by the same companies, that are more relevant for library collections or for museum collections. So the main idea of a collections management system is that it's a software that's tailored for archival use and managing archival collections. I would say that they become increasingly necessary as the scale and complexity of your archive grow. So you'll tend to find that with very large archival institutions, such as a university or a large public authority, they'll almost certainly have some sort of collections management software that's almost unavoidable. There are many different options, and different options also have different features. And I would also say they can be quite distinct from digital asset management software, although some companies that provide collections management systems will sometimes also provide this as well. It's also worth saying that sometimes these can be in the criteria of a job description. So for example, if you look through some job descriptions over the past couple of years, one thing I've noticed is that there seems to be an increase for people who have a knowledge of Calm Axial. That's a very popular and a very commonly used archival collections management system, and it's not uncommon for employers to either list that, usually as a part of the desirable criteria, but also it can vary the understanding of these systems. So they are worth knowing about, and it is worth having a sort of basic knowledge of what's out there and what you might expect to find. Okay, so some of the common and possible features of a collections management system. So I'd say one of the real benefits of a collection management system is that it often has inbuilt systems that make it compliant with international standards such as ISAD-G. So it will include the fields that are prevalent in an ISAD-G description and ensure that you remain compliant with that. It can often allow you to create easily observable hierarchical catalogues. In fact, I would say that's quite essential. And it can also sometimes allow you the opportunity to record other types of information relevant to needs. So for example, I think AdLib offer a feature that allow you to record information relevant to location changes of a record or a catalogue, which is quite useful. One of the real benefits of content management systems, I would say, is when they offer easy assimilation with online catalogues. Not every system offer this. So for example, AdLib offer this, but I don't think Archivist Toolkit do. And essentially what this means is that if you update your catalogue locally, then the online catalogue will update as well. And this can make life a lot easier. It can also create additional risks as well. It means that if you make a mistake, it can go online without you really being aware than if you have that barrier. So I can guess it can work both ways. One of the real advantages is that it can often be easier to create linked data such as tagging names in multiple catalogs. So for example, you may create a name access point for someone and tag it within a certain catalog, and then you may tag that certain name in another catalog, and it means that you can essentially, after a while, you could look up that name and then see what collections that they're linked with, and that can be a real advantage. And one of the other advantages can often be that if you update the name once, then it will update across every record as well. So linked data is often one of the real benefits of a collections management system. I would say that it can often be easier to search and retrieve records as well. So sometimes they'll offer inbuilt features that allow you to search for collections by the level of description, such as fund level or item level or file level. And this is a really, really big advantage because if you've worked with archival catalogs, you know that sometimes they can often include thousands of descriptions, and being able to only search for funds level or series levels can make your life an awful lot easier. And of course, sometimes they'll offer additional features, such as being able to mass change certain types of records or certain types of information. But that said, I would always recommend extreme caution with that. So as I say, every software is different, but these are some of the most common and useful features as far as I can see. Okay, that said, there are some potential considerations, and I would also say things you would need to consider if you're ever in the process of selecting a content management system. First of all, depending on the software you can use, it can involve quite a significant learning curve, and it can also require very specific installation requirements. That's something always to be careful of. Operating systems, they tend to develop and they tend to evolve quite quickly, and it's worth considering whether or not a content management system is right for you and whether it's compatible with other systems you might have. I did work at one institution that was using multiple systems at the same time, which I kind of thought was a mistake. It actually seemed to cause more problems than solutions, I would say. Some content management systems are open source and free, while others are commercial, and that's something you need to think about. While the open source ones might seem naturally more attractive, sometimes the commercial ones are much easier to use. And if you're thinking about costs, if you're in a situation where you're balancing up the costs of different systems, it is worth considering the labor costs. If you have a more complex open source system, which takes a lot more time to learn how to use and is generally a bit slower, sometimes the long-term cost of a commercial system can be far less. I would say that user communities also vary. So some have really fantastic community users where there's multiple people who use it, while others much less so. So I think access to memory has a really, really broad user community, whereas other softwares such as archive space, I think have a much, much smaller user community. And sometimes that's again something you need to think about, like what support might be out there and what other people you could learn from if a problem arises. Um, yeah, I would also say that you maybe need to consider issues of long-term preservation and migration. So this is where this is one point I'd really want to emphasize. I would always be a bit wary about putting all your eggs in one basket, and be aware that the more information you put into a system, the more dependent you can become in that system. Softwares, like any other form of digital technology, can become obsolescent, and whatever system or software you use, I would always recommend that you have a sort of backup digital preservation strategy for the information you're recording. So, for example, some cataloging systems such as AdLib or Archivist Toolkit will allow you the option to export your archives into other formats such as EAD or Microsoft Word. And I would thoroughly recommend this as just a backup because you can't predict how the technology will work out. And I think, I would recommend that you avoid complacency. Also, sometimes the software can be restrictive and it can also be quite clunky. Some softwares are obviously better than others, but sometimes they can be quite tricky to navigate. It's not uncommon, depending on what software you're using, it's not uncommon that some archivists might catalog a collection on Microsoft Excel, or they'll use Excel to compile descriptions and then they'll copy it into the content management system once finalized. And sometimes they don't always include other features such as spell check options. For example, I don't think Archivist Toolkit includes this. So whenever I've catalogued using that software, I've tended to type out my descriptions in Microsoft Word first, or if an option exists, I'll maybe export my catalogue into Microsoft Word so that I can properly spell check it. And of course, there are other options that can be explored for other types of institutions or maybe other types of tasks. FileMaker Pro, that's a proprietary system that's more aimed at databases, but you can develop, if you have an understanding of FileMaker Pro, you could develop a relatively tailored and customizable content management system. And Microsoft Excel can still be a very useful software, even if it's for basic tasks such as box listing. So, as I said, I think part of this will vary on the different institutions and what resources you have and your user needs, but other options do exist, and it's always worth keeping an open mind, I'd say. Okay, so a couple of examples. So example one is access to memory, and otherwise known as ATOM. And as described by the National Archives, ATOM is a web-based open source application for standards-based archival description and access in multilingual, multi-repository environments. And that's how it is described by the National Archives. I've had the pleasure of using access to memory. I used it at the University of Strathclyde, for which I've posted a link. You can access to memory on our website. And one thing I remember very well about that catalogue, about that software, was that you could create authority records that were quite compliant with ISAR CPF, and that was quite an easy structure to follow, and it simplified the process quite a lot. Another thing that's quite interesting about access to memory is that they have quite an international user forum. I would say that it's generally a good sign for a content management system if it's used by multiple people and also multiple countries, because that can often, although I would never take this for granted, that can often mean that it's maybe less likely to become obsolescent or to go off the market. Example two is Calm Axial. So one big difference I would say between Calm Axial and access to memory is that Calm products are proprietary, they're commercial. That's to say that they cost money. Calm Archive Solutions, as described by the National Archives, Calm Archive Solutions are built on a foundation of international standards for archival and curational collections management and are customizable to meet different requirements. One of the key things about Calm is, again, similar to other content management softwares, is it's compliant with standards such as ISAG. I think that the good thing about Calm as well is that they branch out into other areas. So for example, if you have Calm software, there's extra features that can help support you with things such as digitization or making materials available online. And it's also worth pointing out that Axial offer a range of other solutions and digital asset management systems. So Axial are generally quite a big producer, and from what I understand, they include archivists in the creation of their softwares, and that's definitely a plus point. And if you want an example of a Calm content management system and how it's been used, I would look at Barnsley Museums as a one-off example. Okay, so lastly, there's just a few guidance documents and notes. The National Archives provide a really good guide to content management systems, and there's a few other sources that I recommend as well. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and feel more than free to leave any comments or suggestions below. And if you enjoy these videos, I would be extremely grateful if you could like, subscribe and share. And also just to remind you that I would be absolutely delighted to take any requests for future videos also.